always trying to understand, like, say we're talking to Google, like understand what three things is Google currently investing in, like this team at Google that we want to work with. And then can we fit into any of these three things? And if yes, then let's be part of those like one, two, or three things. And if there was that fit, and if you could fit in, like you could already like see the difference that partnership would go somewhere and we would be having a conversation.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have on our show Juraj Pal, who has led partnership in Slido. Juraj helped to scale Slido through marketing and product partnerships. And Slido today is a product everyone loves and knows, and it's used in real life and digital events, small and large, such as South by Southwest or Web Summit. Last year, Juraj became VP of product in Slido, which gives him unique perspective on how partnerships interact with product and the importance of partnerships. I personally learned a lot from these conversations. Hope you'll enjoy it. Juraj, delighted to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Slido is an amazing product. Everyone knows it. It's simple. You can vote anonymously. But nobody, not that many people actually know that you powered like 1 million events over the last 9 years in existence. Despite that everyone knows Slido, I'm sure that product is evolving. So how do you describe Slido today to your friends?
Today, we talk about Slido as an audience interaction app for hybrid meetings. I think COVID and everything, which we can talk about later, changed this as well and changed our focus a bit. But really, we found this spot with hybrid meetings where we power interaction between the speaker and the audience. So those could be things like live Q&A, live polls, quizzes, etc. So that's kind of the quick summary.
You joined Slido as employee number 20, and you was focusing on partnerships. Many people think partnerships are very strategic, and they think about alliances and like very complex products. But you actually scaled Slido through partnerships. When you started, why partnership very important?
When I joined Slido, as you said, we were pretty early on, so we didn't really have many like defined roles, as it's quite typical with early stage startups. So everyone was wearing multiple hats and trying to figure out like how can we help Slido get to places. So I did enjoy thinking I'm going to do partnerships, and this is what partnerships means. Like I honestly didn't even know that I personally am going to end up doing this. I didn't know what that label means. I didn't know that those jobs even exist out in there in the world. So it was kind of all just kind of winging it. But one sort of question that I remember that I've been asking a lot at that stage, I could be doing a lot of things, but I always ask myself, like, what is the most impactful thing that I can do today to help the growth of Slido? And pretty much everyone in the company asked that. And we even like pushed ourselves to ask this question, like in terms of like prioritizing really what's important. But for me, it was like, okay, I'm here and I can do stuff in this day, but what will really help us grow to the next stage, to get more users, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how I naively got into partnerships, because that growth, suddenly I figured it could be if I partner with someone or if we do something cool, like a co-marketing opportunity with company X or something like that. So for me, it was kind of thinking through this lens of like, what can we do that's maybe not by a certain playbook that will get us somewhere ahead of the plan that we have.
Can you give an example of partnerships that you had early days? And then I'm sure that, like you mentioned, you was a little bit opportunistic in the beginning and trying to figure out like things. But like how this evolved into like a playbook or partnership become like a driver of your growth strategy?
When I joined and kind of the first few years of Slido, even like how Slido got started by the founders, it was really focused on conferences and live events, kind of like the big events where you have a speaker and you have hundreds of people in the audience, and it's really hard to build that interaction. And like people are shy to raise their hand in a huge audience and ask a question to famous speaker, etc. So that was our focus, and that's where the product got kind of the first product market fit. It changed later on, which we can also get into, like how we started growing to corporate segment, enterprise, internal meetings, etc. But kind of being in this event world, like one example of that partnership, kind of a first early partnership would be Web Summit. I'm sure many people know the conference, very much known in the tech space as like the place where people go. It's a huge event, and it kind of fits all the things that Slido was focusing on right at the moment. So I remember even the founder and CEO, Peter, he was telling me like, I'll do whatever I want, but one day get us to Web Summit. I was like, okay, that was like my little North Star in my head, thinking like, okay, how the hell do I get Slido to Web Summit? Because it's a huge event, stakes are high. They're not gonna be willing to talk to us. We're just a random small startup at that point. So it was kind of this game of like cold email and reaching out to Web Summit in this example or other conference organizers at that point started, and really just like together with the team creatively figuring out like who do we know, how can we get into touch with this potential partner. And then with Web Summit, it came down to realizing that there's so much more potential in terms of the marketing value for Slido if we do something with them that's not just selling them our software. Like, yeah, we could do that, and Slido is not expensive, especially for an event organizer. So like, how can Web Summit gain something out of it, and how can we gain something out of it? And with Slido's product, I think the unique advantage is that virality that's built into it. So if someone saw Slido in action at a conference before COVID, like you remember that, you're sitting in the audience and Slido suddenly shows up on the screen and you're looking at the Slido logo, you're using the product. So it's a unique position for the product that gets used by both kind of like two types of users essentially. And we saw that especially with the audience, like as soon as you start using Slido for a conference, you kind of experience the value firsthand. Then it gets you thinking like, oh, I have this meeting next week with my team. Maybe I could use something like Slido there. And we saw like these almost like little growth loops building out. So we're like, okay, let's make sure that Slido is visible at more of these large scale tech events where our potential target audience is, and let's have them experience the product. And on the side of like the organizer, Web Summit, for example, it was really about working with them on like sort of like consulting almost on their meeting design. Like, how do you sort of organize this session or this programming with Slido in mind, with audience interaction in mind? So it almost was like consultancy where you're helping them design this session. We called it meeting design later on. So it wasn't just like, here's a piece of software, use it, and we're like hands off. Like we would travel to these conferences. It was a bigger operation, and we call it partnership at that moment. And it still holds true, but that's kind of how it evolved. And we started seeing these things that, okay, let's do more of that now. Let's put it into a playbook and repeat that for other tech conference and other conference, etc.
Great story. I personally see that with my own experiences that as soon as you have like anchor, event or anchor guest or anchor, project, then you can essentially roll out like similar projects. As soon as that project is like super strategic and very important. But I'm sure everyone who is in partnerships and they kind of watching this and they're like, how the hell did you get Web Summit to partner with you? Like, I'm super interested into like details. So you mentioned like a bunch of cold emails. I mean, everyone in partnerships writes a lot of cold emails. Can you talk a little bit about details, and then like what you recognized later in terms of marketing? And another thing that I found like really compelling in what you said is actually helping them to get most of the product and kind of work together as a creating like real experience. Can you like lean a little bit more on that as well?
The challenging part with working with this type of customer, which were event organizers and event agencies, even in the first few years, is that I think there's some statistics on that, like event organizers is one of the more stressful jobs. And we're in the situation selling these people a new software that they never tried for their live event, which like things could go wrong and then they are responsible. And like, even now, like when we're doing everything virtual, like if technology doesn't work, we know how painful that is. If like live stream's still working, Zoom still working, whatever it is, like it's just a lot of stress on the event organizer. So it was really kind of just like this thin ice and this game that we were playing of like, okay, how can we help you, especially with this first use, until they really see and experience the value that we are proposing with the partnership, or like with just the proposal of like them using Slido. And in reality, that kind of transferred to, us going to a lot of these events and conferences, especially the first time they used Slido, especially if it was a larger conference like Web Summit or some others, like being there and doing jobs that like none of the Slido team were really hired for, but almost like sitting next to the AV technician sometimes in a dark room, helping connect cables, like random stuff, honestly, that you're not doing as a partnership or any other team member. But it was kind of this, I think Slido's value, one of the values is really just pure care. And I think this was transferred to that relation to the customer. Like, okay, you have a huge event that you're planning. You said, yes, I want to try using Slido for the first time. So, okay, we're going to be there, and we're going to be there almost like this tech support, but it was kind of more. And it was, as you said, that level of like designing the sessions with them. So with Web Summit, I remember after this series of like cold emails and meetings and trying to like help them understand why interaction at their event is important. And they knew it, like many of the organizers knew it already because they would hear it from feedback from their attendees, etc. But then it was about transferring this notion of like, it's a pretty simple software. It's not going to change the world if I just use it. But we were able to come in with, examples and meeting design sort of stories from other customers of like, okay, you have this panel discussion. Well, if you want to make it more interactive and engaging for your audience, here's how we suggest that you plug in Slido like in between this and that moment, and like use a poll there. Because using Slido just for the sake of, hey, I have a fun poll going on, is not going to change much about the event or the meeting. It's really when it's kind of meaningfully integrated into your meeting design. And there was a lot more on the thought leadership side, more than partnerships or biz dev. And we have a great team of folks who kind of invested themselves into that and spread that knowledge internally, and kind of everyone could train, that we could more confidently come and talk to our customers about that and help them. It was like almost like become a partner in crime for them to make their event successful.
It's a really compelling story. Like launching partnership is typically you do whatever needs to be done, and you almost like a startup CEO. When who is responsible, you're responsible. Quick question regarding nature of the partnership, because there's like a lot of discussion: what is partnership, what is sales, what is like marketing, and so on. Partnering with events sounds intuitive, especially for Slido. Why did you call this partnership?
I think a lot of this is not knowing any better and like being an early startup and just figuring things out as we went. So, I'm not saying that this is the right formula for anything, but worked for us up until now. And we also learned a lot of mistakes and change, and every 6 months we have evaluated as you do. But the kind of why this, so these things that we talked about so far, really, they are marketing partnerships. Like in other companies, maybe field marketing or other functions like that would own those things. We own them with marketing, with partnerships, because it was kind of a more broader life cycle. Like as we talked, it started with those cold emails, and our sales team wasn't doing that. We didn't really have an inbound sales team for, like, even still now, it's kind of a sensitive topic. Like a lot of the sales was outbound, which was great and awesome, but it also meant that we didn't have a sales force that would be like calling up people and selling them Slido. So it kind of landed on the partnerships team, that we would like identify potential partners, reach out, network, like all of that work was done by us. And then we would also own that, like, was like the implementation, or like going to them and working with them, partnering, negotiating, like, what is the partnership like? Because it wasn't just like, hey, you guys use Slido for free and we get our logo on the screen. Like, it was like, what else can we do? Like, can we co-host a session? Can we, like, again, other marketing, co-marketing opportunities that we could explore? And then, the post, almost like partnership, was kind of more like account management, but it was still owned by us. And we would kind of figure out like, okay, next year with this partner, what more can we do, and what are we going to do? And it all then changed with like product partnerships, and we can talk about that too. But and then we eventually split the marketing side and product side. But yeah, at the beginning, it was very marketing in nature. Again, I think mostly thanks to how Slido's virality plays into the product, and kind of just building up on that opportunity. But yeah, that's kind of how we did it.
You've done an amazing job. And to be honest, I see a lot of companies start with like marketing partnership because it's like easy, almost like no barrier to enter, easy to start. And then you kind of double down and you expand, right? You partnered with Web Summit, and then you started to, grow and, evolve. How did you evolve? You just mentioned that you split between product partnership and marketing partnerships. Tell a little bit more about that.
Over time, one thing that changed on kind of the all company strategy level was that as we started with sort of focusing on conferences and big events, I think thanks to that marketing that we just talked about, we're starting to see more traction in internal meetings and in companies themselves. So people in the audience would take Slido, use it for their own meetings. I remember specifically one year, I think the first year when we did South by Southwest in the US, like we saw a huge spike in signups, mostly probably from that audience because it was a great marketing opportunity. But those signups were really, those weren't event organizers. Those were new users that we didn't really understand at that point. So a lot more has changed. And we said, okay, now our company strategy is going to shift to support and grow in this segment of internal meetings. So think all hands meetings, town halls, just like kind of the all company meeting, which to me is almost like a conference, but internal. It has many similarities. Like you would have the CEO or the executive team presenting, and you would have the employees watching, and you have this gap that you have to kind of bridge with some sort of engagement. And similar to speaker and a huge audience, like not everyone is comfortable to raise their hand and ask their CEO or leader about something like, why is our company strategy this and that, and not, that, or like more sensitive questions. So we realized that companies, and especially as companies were working on kind of having more transparent and open cultures, like this level of engagement was important. So that sort of impacted the way how we looked at partnerships. And that's where we started sort of seeing more of, okay, we have these marketing partnerships in place, but if we want to work with these companies, they use a bunch of tools that Slido doesn't work with. And that workflow is kind of clunky. And it almost was a bit of a threat or a challenge, to be honest, that we talked about a lot in meetings. And that was just like looking at Slido was really just a feature in these companies, feature that could be easily killed if like someone didn't like that product. It wasn't, their Slack, it wasn't their Zoom, it wasn't a core product that really embedded into their workflow and was critical. So that got us thinking like how to kind of overcome this challenge or this threat. How can we be part of that workflow, and what is even that workflow? And that slowly led us into integrations, especially product integrations. So that's kind of how we got there. And the very first project was us integrating with Slack, which was still very experimental. I remember we allocated this 3-people team, and our founder was like you guys do whatever you want to do with Slack, like figure out a product integration. If it doesn't work, like no one's going to be mad. Just like have fun with it. If we get somewhere, great. If we don't, we will learn something. So it was like, we didn't know that we were going to double down on that so much, but it was kind of the first step towards it.
Getting your foot in the door and then essentially embedding into workflow. I can totally see that. You mentioned that you integrated also like with Google and Slack in product integrations. What was challenging and what actually was counterintuitive maybe from doing these integrations and kind of showing this to users and getting the kind of feedback and figuring out like what is the next steps for the partnership team?
I think the challenge was, it's not nothing unique. It's true to many early stage startup, but the challenge was that we were in these conversations kind of the little fish, and the Googles and the Slacks were the big guys. And, why should they listen to Slido if they, in many cases, like never heard about Slido, never saw Slido used? Like it just wasn't, we didn't have that name or that brand. It had some brand, but it wasn't so strong that we could come to Slack and almost like be the same level of conversation. So it always felt like we have to, like it took a long time, like even with Web Summit back then, it took us probably almost 2 years to really get to that first point when they use Slido at an event. And then, you take the example of Google, for example, that was also a year of just like figuring out ways how we could get into a conversation with them, how we can make them listen. And I think the way we eventually started to maybe not overcome this, because again, like we were still small and you can't really change that. But to understand like how to navigate in this, and this is an advice I got from comes from, and also in the partnerships world. And it's something that we asked partners later on, which was always trying to understand, like, say we're talking to Google, like understand what 3 things is Google currently investing in, like this team at Google that we want to work with. Mm-hmm. And then can we fit into any of these 3 things? And if yes, then let's be part of those like 1, 2, or 3 things. And if there was that fit, and if you could fit in, like you could already like see the difference that partnership would go somewhere, and we would be having a conversation. But sometimes, like the early days, I wouldn't ask that question. I would just kind of jump at Slack, like, oh, you're a cool company, we definitely need to partner with you. But I wouldn't understand what Slack wants to do, what's in their company objective, like what does this person I'm talking to want to achieve in their job. I would just be kind of like trying to convince them that we need to build something together. And it would kind of just stall and not go anywhere. But understanding this and asking the question, like, okay, what are your priorities for the next X months? What are the top 3 things that you want to work with? And can I help you? Can Slido help you with any of them? If yes, then let's go do it together. But if not, maybe let's revisit in a few months. So that was kind of a small but important thing and change in narrative when we're talking to partners, especially like the Googles and kind of the large Microsoft, the large companies, being just like a random startup from Europe. Also, we're bootstrapped, and I feel like it was our pride and still is. Well, not now that we exited, but it was always this pride. But I don't think it always helped, because I think many startups are VC backed. You kind of have this stamp of approval behind you, and you can come to a partner like we're funded, we're the startup, but we were in many cases just like this random kind of like this silent hero coming from nowhere.